In the 1950s, Black vocal groups were enjoying a degree of success never before seen through the invigorating vocal middle ground between sentimental pop standards of the 40s and seductive rhythms of R&B. These vocal group stylings were dubbed Doo-Wop in the 1960s in reference to the vocables used by the supporting parts.
Now I'm happy in the chapel where people are of one accord. Yes, we gather in the chapel just to sing and praise the Lord.
In the same decade, barbershop quartet champions the Buffalo Bills made their film debut in The Music Man and securely implanted the nostalgic image of barbershop rooted in an idealized mythic past of sentimental small-town America.
Ice cream, talk slow. Ice cream.
You see? Singing is just sustained talking. Now you, sir.
Ice cream.
Now you, sir.
Ice cream.
Now you, sir. Ice cream.
Quartets like the Buffalo Bills are viewed today as exemplars of barbershop, but they are representatives of the Society for the Preservation and Encouragement of Barbershop Quartet Singing in America, affectionately known as SPEPSQA based on the spelling of its acronym. The society, formed in 1938, has defined a narrow iteration of barbershop singing that has persistently portrayed barbershop as a white male tradition. It still operates today as the Barbershop Harmony Society, or BHS, and continues to play a central role in constructing America's imagined understanding of barbershop singing, which also implicitly speaks to an understanding of the doo-wop tradition. By accepting the Society's portrayal of barbershop and allowing it to become a definition, we have continued to prop up racist systems and cover up the role of marginalized groups in America's music history. Some of America's quintessential vocal harmony, these two nostalgic traditions are typically studied in separate contexts and are generally understood to be stably classified. Barbershop under the umbrella of close harmony and doo-wop under the umbrella of R&B. And that's normally where our classifications end. This has led to scholarship that overlooks the shared history, repertoire, and social functions passed down through the earliest barbershop singing in the late 19th century. Current classifications uphold racially charged labels from the music industry and mythic ideas of barbershop singing in America. Drawing from genre theory and accounts and recordings of barbershop and doo-wop throughout their development from the 1870s through the 1950s, I propose a new classification that positions doo-wop and the barbershop practices of SPEPSQA as two subgenres of the barbershop genre. For this presentation, I will continue to refer to the Society as SPEPSQA to better reflect the development of the Society from its founding through the 1950s, as opposed to its identity under its current name, BHS. While examining one subsection of racialized terms, I of course encountered a multitude of others, most prominently R&B. I will continue to use it as it refers to general styles around the 1950s with the understanding that the work to break down racist ideas is constant. In order to properly redefine the classifications of these styles, we must first explore what genre is. It is defined as a class, type, or category sanctioned by convention, which is most often codified by the repetition of characteristics across bodies of work. In the late 1980s, musicology caught on to arguments developed by literary scholars like Adina Rosmarin that described genre as a contract between creator and receiver that can be intentionally broken by either party. As a cataloger at FSU's music library, I describe and organize materials so patrons can find them in the library. The genres, subjects, forms, etc. that we use to describe materials are vital to discover and share information, but they rely on that contract that elicits a shared meaning between cataloger and patron. Simon Frith explores a similar idea in popular music, noting that the music industry influences market tastes and behaviors while simultaneously reacting to those tastes and behaviors to maximize profitability and perpetuate cultural norms. More recently, Eric Drott has emphasized that musical classifications need not be permanent nor canonical, because Conceiving a genre in such a prescriptive fashion transforms it into an instrument of symbolic violence, whose baleful effects may be seen in the exclusions that result from the habitual identification of certain genres with certain social groups. My reclassification of these genres is my correction to our previously racially segregated readings of these two traditions, which uphold the racially segregated culture that created them. I still apply a hierarchical framework. Close harmony acts as a meta-genre, which exists as a loose amalgam of various styles. Within that, barbershop is a genre, or a more specifically understood form of close harmony. However, barbershop is not so singular of a tradition as the society has portrayed. Therefore, I separate early barbershop singing practices from the tradition that was codified by Spepswa. The idiom as practiced throughout America from the 1860s into the 1920s is designated as barbershop, while anything associated with the American barbershop organizations or affiliates is designated as Spepswa barbershop. Spepswa barbershop, then, can be viewed as a subgenre of the barbershop genre, since it is both a simplistic depiction and well-established. Doo-Wop, which is typically and vaguely categorized under the R&B meta-genre, can also be viewed as a well-established subgenre of the barbershop genre. This reorganization is meant to illustrate the underlying assumptions that contributed to the racially charged classifications put forth by people in power within the music industry, and provide more equal treatment of these American close harmony styles. Between the 1920s and 1990s, Spepswa and pop culture like the Music Man perpetuated the idea that barbershop had passed down from the European tradition of barber's music through singing troupes like Tyrolese minstrel singers. This half-truth has supported the perception of barbershop quartets as tokens of nostalgia, firmly rooted in Victorian-era ideals that support closeness and uniformity, as well as traditionally white and male power structures. Beginning in the 1990s, barbershop scholars like Lynn Abbott and Gage Averill have helped expand the narrative of barbershop's history, rooting the beginnings of the style within the African-American community, as far back as the 1870s, possibly even the 1860s. They demonstrate that both the European and African-American traditions interacted with and reacted to each other in a hotbed of popular, sacred, parlor, Tin Pan Alley, and ragtime tunes. Abbott centers accounts of Black-owned barbershops that served white patrons as a major transmission site of the style across America, although quartets could also be heard on the concert stage and the street corner, illustrating the actual ubiquity of quartet singing in both Black and white communities. Even James Weldon Johnson declared, "Any four colored boys are a quartet," and that every barbershop had its quartet. In his groundbreaking book, 4 Parts No Waiting, Gage Averill outlines the development of recreational quartets as they transitioned from the street corner to the stage. Quartets gained popularity on the minstrel stage, and Black and white quartets even headlined some shows, though Black quartets were often booked as authentic performances in place of or in addition to the prevalent blackface performances. As American theater transitioned into vaudeville, barbershop hit its golden era, dominating on the stage as well as in the recording studio. Shows were considered incomplete without a barbershop quartet in both the Black and white circuits. Along with the success enjoyed on vaudeville, barbershop quartets were chosen to record for the earliest commercial records because producers felt that the style lent itself best to the capabilities of earlier recording equipment. The earliest recorded vocal quartets were actually African American, but their financial success was very limited until the advent of race record labels much later. Otherwise, the most commercially successful quartets were white. Here we can see the beginnings of the music industry's power over musical labels. Barbershop was so intertwined with early recordings, and although African American quartets enjoyed regular success on the vaudeville stage, the recording industry promoted white barbershop quartets. The fact that Black quartets had extremely limited opportunities to record easily separated them from their association with the barbershop tradition, first by excluding them from major recordings at all, and later by restricting the audience that would hear them. Throughout the Golden Era, however, there is still a lot of overlap between Black and white practices, and Averill observes that white quartets tended to take note from their Black counterparts. Listen first to the unique quartet, an African-American quartet that was likely the first quartet to ever record. Here's their rendition of Mama's Black Baby Boy from 1893. Note the very faint uppermost harmony and the echoes that adds the color to the chords using portamenti.
Down the Christmas, I'm on a baby boy. He gave me 10 cents to buy me some gum. I'm a baby boy. I stepped in a saloon and I bought me some rum. I'm a baby boy.
Next, almost a decade later, but still within the golden era, we have the Haydn Quartet, a very successful white quartet singing their version of Sweet Adeline, a tune that has become synonymous with barbershop singing. Not captured in this clip is the small band accompaniment that rounds out the beginning and end of the song, as well as the lead solo on the first verse, both common practices for all barbershop quartets.
Sweet Adeline, my Adeline, tonight, dear heart, for you I pine.
In these limited examples, we can see that barbershop singing could include some of the following characteristics: call and response style, echoes, a first or second tenor lead, a solo break, secondary dominant progressions, portamenti, and minimal or no accompaniment. We also know from early accounts that the style was highly improvisatory in nature and was practiced in public community spaces, including but not limited to barbershops, bar halls, and street corners. The scholarship on early barbershop origins illustrates an ongoing cycle of disservice to the African American musical community. In order to do justice to this community that was erased out of its own tradition and to better position the various practices of barbershop singing, it is imperative to differentiate between the tradition as sung in its earliest amateur form and the tradition as sung later through Spepsqua. When viewing doo-wop and Spepsqua barbershop as subgenres, we can see them developing around similar times, which only makes their contrast and relationship stronger. The clearest connection between these two subgenres is through the Mills Brothers, one of the most influential groups for the development of doo-wop and one of the most prolific vocal groups of the 20th century. The Mills Brothers were raised surrounded by barbershop harmony through their father's barbershop business, as well as his own quartet, the Four Kings of Harmony. The brothers began singing vaudeville circuits in the 1920s, around the same time that the golden era of barbershop was beginning to dwindle. They actively participated in the barbershop tradition and helped push the boundaries of the genre into something new. Their novel imitations of instruments catapulted them into the popular eye and laid the groundwork for more Black vocal groups to be accepted by white audiences. They, along with the Ink Spots, provided models for young men in the Black community to raise their social status through music they were already singing on the corner. The subgenre, as begun by the Mills Brothers, is known by practitioners as street corner music. It was sung a cappella in hallways, on stoops, at local talent contests, and so on, where people could get together and try out different harmonies, just like in the barbershop and Spepsqua barbershop practices. Black quartet singing continued despite the different labels bestowed upon it by the music industry that have continued to narrowly define it through racially charged classifications. As a term, doo-wop was applied retroactively to describe the type of rhythm and blues harmony coming out of Black vocal quartets starting around the 50s. The style is characterized by vocables in the harmony parts, echoes, and a tenor falsetto lead with occasional bass lead. The accompaniment style and instrumentation are not specified in definitions, but arrangements grew increasingly more complex throughout the decade, some leaning toward the poppy orchestral side and some toward the rock and roll side. Either way, the accompaniment was heavily dependent on producers and music and market tastes. Black artists in the 1950s, including doo-wop groups, increasingly crossed over from the R&B charts into the mainstream pop charts as they gained popularity over white cover artists. But these Black artists were still made to fit into a mold of white acceptability, particularly through work on the part of record producers by maintaining non-threatening appearances and adjusting their lyrical content. In order to attain and retain mainstream popularity, Black artists had to, quote, be Black enough to make whites comfortable, but neither Black enough to make them feel threatened, nor white enough to imply parity or parody. This was certainly true for doo-wop groups, who quickly understood the formula to stardom, follow on the heels of greats like the Ink Spots and the Orioles on standard tunes from Tin Pan Alley that appeal to white audiences. Producers, in turn, were able to exploit the abundance of Black vocal groups and churn out recordings that were arranged to maximize profitability for the slowly converging R&B and pop charts. Doo-Wop permeated street corners as a community singing tradition within the barbershop genre, but this connection was eclipsed by racialized labels and production decisions from the music industry that cultivated and reinforced a perception and reality of separation. Just after the height of the Mills Brothers' popularity, Spepsko was founded due to a sense of loss for white male public space in the wake of an increasingly female workforce. What Americans identify now as the barbershop ring comes directly from the white male society. Barbershop harmony is a style of unaccompanied vocal music characterized by consonant four-part chords for every melody note in a primarily homorhythmic texture. The melody is consistently sung by the lead, the tenor harmonizes above the melody, the bass sings the lowest harmonizing notes, and the baritone completes the chord. This definition excludes practices like call and response, melody sung by any other part than the second tenor, dissonance other than the barbershop chord, accompaniment, and vocables. These are all characteristics that were utilized both in the very early beginnings of barbershop and during the golden era by both Black and white quartets. The Society, an all-white organization from its founding in 1938 until 1963, standardized and defined a specific sound rooted in their white male identity that excluded the practices of those who also participated in the tradition before them. The organization worked to maintain this identity drawn from nostalgic neo-Victorian ideals of emotional, musical, and social closeness that in turn gave way to aesthetic ideals that have eclipsed any other barbershop practice ever since. With all of these definitions and historical context in mind, let's listen to some comparative examples. First, two recordings of the same tune we heard earlier, Sweet Adeline. The first by the Mills Brothers, recorded in the late 1930s. Note the light guitar strumming in the background, the emphasis on the tenor lead and the lowered bass.
Sweet Adeline, my Adeline, at night, dear heart, for you I pine.
The second recording is by the Buffalo Bills, recorded sometime in the 1960s. Note that all singers sing almost all the words at the same time. It's unaccompanied and the range is much closer.
Sweet Adeline, sweet Adeline, my Adeline, at night, dear heart, for you I pine.
Here, the renditions are very similar to each other and to the barbershop genre, but their differences illustrate the early split into separate subgenres. Next, we have a recording of the Moonglows, a typical exemplar of the doo-wop tradition. Here, doo-wop has stepped more prominently into the rhythm and blues idiom, with the stronger backbeat and implementation of electric guitar accompaniment.
Sincerely, oh yes, sincerely, 'cause I love you so dearly. Please say you'll be mine.
This is in contrast to the Suntones, the 1961 International Quartet Champions, which hold true to Spepsko Barbershop's aesthetic values of close range and mostly homorhythmic texture.
The oldest songs, the oldest songs, the good old songs for me. I love to hear those minor chords and good close harmony.
These two recordings show the further and possibly complete separation between the two subgenres. Spepsko Barbershop buckles down on a very specific model of barbershop, while doo-wop retains more of the freedom of barbershop and incorporates old and new styles prevalent throughout the 50s R&B and pop charts. To summarize, genre creation is flexible, and there are a multitude of interactions and relationships between all musical styles, music industry demands, and personal and societal bias. Within the context of new historical information and the confrontation of our own assumptions, genres can be manipulated in a myriad of ways to better understand different styles of music and their contexts. In light of the evidence of the African American origins of barbershop, we cannot and should not discount the clear products of the style within the African American community. And we certainly cannot continue to prioritize a white codification over any other possible development of the sound. America's constant struggle with deep racial segregation has had lasting and hurtful effects on the musical landscape, including the way we categorize different styles. Repositioning Spep School Barbershop and Doo-Wop under the genre of barbershop makes apparent the deeply entrenched biases that have separated two close harmony styles because of race. When we continually examine our musical classifications, we can begin to dismantle the power structures beneath them to illuminate a more accurate and robust portrait of American culture, society, and music. Thank you.